Hello everyone, and thanks for joining today and making the time. To the extent possible, I would love to make this as dynamic as possible, so please tweet us at SoftServe Inc. or at Health Eugene, and we'll answer any of these questions at the end of the webinar.
And obviously, this is a very important topic, as the advances in technology and genomics, and as a leading consulting company globally, SoftServe is tracking the trends in the healthcare industry. The one thing that I just wanted to point out, and Olga, you mentioned and touched on it a little bit, while we think of personalized medicine as ingestion of drugs, we look at it as not just from a life sciences and pharma perspective, but also impacts around the healthcare ecosystem. And you'll see through the presentation how this impacts providers, payers, as well as the life sciences, which is the main target for the discussion today. So before we really dive into the sort of the meat of the presentation, there's obviously been quite a lot of regulations coming out. So a big component of what we're going to cover is Century 21 Act and its impact. But just to step back and to make sure that everybody understands the terminology, personalized medicine, and thanks to Wikipedia, as we now refer to as a source of knowledge. But to sum it up, it's the emerging, and even though it's been emerging for many years, practice of medicine that actually uses to prevent and diagnose and the treatment of the disease using a genetic profile. Personally, I've done the 23andMe test, many years ago, and my DNA is out in the open for all the researchers to see and analyze. And obviously, we'll touch a little bit on those privacy components as this industry speeds forward. Now, personalized healthcare is actually relatively used interchangeably, but it's a very important distinction. So while personalized medicine is referred to, again, using the genetics, the personalized healthcare is actually a broader platform that actually includes other things, other biologic information, for example, biomarkers, microbiome, et cetera. And there are, even consumerized tests that are on the market now to get your microbiome test done and combine that. The interesting conundrum in the industry today is, as we get more and more personalized in the healthcare and the treatment and understanding the human behaviors and all the aspects of a persona, at the same time as an industry, we're trying to figure out, the population health management. So, what we've seen with our clients, which are a lot of the healthcare ISVs and the payers, this is absolutely on the top of their minds to understand, gather the data, and de-identified fashion, stratify that at the population level and treat global populations. But again, I wanted to also introduce the concept of personalized health and wellness. If we think about the journey of a human, you go from you're healthy and your wellness, you're training constantly. Then in the middle, what I would describe as worried well. So people that are pretty well, pretty healthy, but constantly concerned about things, and those are the people that are actually engaging with the healthcare system. Probably become somewhat of a nuisance to the physicians, but that's separate conversation. And then we have the chronically ill, right? And these are the disease states that take up 80% of our funding across the global healthcare system. And I've been using this slide that's on your screen for a little while. And here at SoftServe, we do believe that health is personal. So every project that we take on, every client we take on, whether it's our business is in the B2B world, but every consulting engagement that we do ultimately somehow touches patients. And so I'm not going to read the quote. So while you're on the screen and you listen to me, please do read the Plato quote. But one thing that I wanted to point out is, we have tremendous amount of medical history and records, and that's been digitized over a number of years. But more importantly, and the topic today is the genetic profile, but there are other things. There's nutrition, which helps quite a bit in the prevention, because you need to tie the nutrition and your physical activity, and by the way, your moods and professional experience, how that impacts your daily life, as well as the hobbies. You do need a mental break, right, from the daily routine. So taking all of that into consideration, again, just to sort of rewind, we have the personalized medicine, which is really all about, taking the right drug at the right time for the right person with the right genetic profile that matches it. We have a little bit of a larger picture of a platform, which is, personalized healthcare, which includes other things, but also biological in nature. And then we have personalized health and wellness, which includes the preventative components to this, to you as an aging person. There's been quite a lot of discussion, right? The industry today spends a tremendous amount of money on drugs and pills, and obviously life sciences companies, are struggling. Don't quote me on this one, but I've read a study that it's something about $2.5 billion in about 10 years to bring a drug to market. And so many pharmaceuticals are thinking really beyond the pill. And, as you can, based on the descriptions that I gave earlier, drugs are, while a big spend, only a portion of your treatment plan. So, kind of fast forwarding, and a key component of our discussion today is the Century 21 Cures Act. And there's a strong belief that, we have a common goal in place. We want to extend the lives of our loved ones. And given the number that I quoted earlier, which is, $2.5 billion to bring the drug to market, and, about 10 years, and that obviously varies on the complexity of the drug. And, we need to get some of these drugs quicker to the market, as well as the medical devices. So that's really, in over 300 pages that we've dissected, that's really at the core of this regulation. So you might be wondering, why a technology consulting company, is looking at some of these regulations. We're not a regulatory company, right? We don't have, legal staff to review the regulations. However, as a leading technology consulting company, we really look at, what does the future hold for our clients? And this is across healthcare ISVs, life sciences, and providers. And our ecosystem approach to our clients is what really, pushes us towards, this patient-centric view of what's happening in the marketplace. So just to give a little bit of the background on this, this passed with flying colors last July, in 2015, to be specific, July 10th. I gave you guys what the essence of it is, but from a funding perspective, the NIH, in not so many words, are creating basically an innovation fund. So NIH have been somewhat defunded over the number of years. So this will actually give about $2 billion per year for 5 years to help the ecosystem speed up the process of clinical trials and getting drugs to market. There's other implications in those 350 pages, and we'll cover some of them. But the key component of our dissection is obviously looking at it from the value add to the patients, and to the ecosystem, and we kind of picked out just really about 5 of these pieces to focus on, and really for each one of them, what are the technology implications as well. So we have some ecosystem and business implications, but then we need to obviously loop in and see how we can help our clients going forward. As I mentioned, and I'm not going to describe the whole process, and I'm not a bioscientist myself. I'm maybe dangerous enough, as some of my friends told me. But one of the key components is really a huge increase in use of biomarkers in personalizing medications. There are obviously tools used today to incorporate the biomarkers and to actually, during the clinical trial process, to validate the clinical endpoints, the accepted industry clinical endpoints. And so part of increased use of biomarkers and, basically not knowing what we don't know yet, what this will allow is companies to actually artificially calculate the clinical endpoints. So, if you think about today, clinical trials take, months to years throughout the process. This will allow, and think about the technology impact here, to artificially calculate and predict what the clinical endpoints will be. So there's a lot of naysayers in this. Some people don't believe that, the drugs that go to the market today, there's a whole process around reporting, as the drug gets approved, even beyond the FDA, how do you report adverse effects? So the naysayers are saying, well, if we start using technology and artificial intelligence and, big data analytics to predict it, how can we really validate the endpoints? And so, if you just step back for a second and think about speeding up a clinical trial, well, what's different now? And so I'm a big believer in this, that there's possibilities to implement monitoring software, mobile tools, and sensors. And this has been slowly happening in the industry already, right? So nobody's waiting for the regulations to kick in. Of course, with the regulatory body and some incentives in the marketplace, I'll say the creativity, for lack of a better term, will be sped up. And so, from a SoftServe perspective, obviously we've been doing technology for 22 years, and from an expertise around mobile and sensors and building software is where we can come in and help, as well as analyzing big data and with our data science team. So kind of touching a little bit, and there's not many from a technology impact perspective, but we felt that this was important to kind of bring out. We've seen in the last 5 years, tremendous increase, almost doubling from an R&D investments, and this is across the life sciences industry. But the interesting part is there's still some regulatory and reimbursement challenges, and if you again think about the challenges for life sciences, once the drug is approved and in the marketplace, a lot of the negotiations that take place with the governments and the payers are really based on the efficacy of the drug in the wild. And collecting that data, given the regulatory practices and the regulatory pressures that the pharma companies are under, is challenging. And so we'll see, I think, a lot more of these investments going into trying to figure out how do you close that loop and how do you get to the reimbursements quicker, and ultimately help the patients get healthier much quicker. I don't know how many of you have heard about citizen science, and this is all around rare diseases, where, for pharmaceuticals, I hate to say this, but in a lot of cases, it's not worth, in quotes, investing the R&D dollars into a much smaller population. So citizens are actually literally taking things into their hands, tracking and tracing, their well-being and or not well-being in a lot of the cases, and believe it or not, actually messing with compounds to try to treat themselves. We're not touching on this in this presentation, but actually part of the Century 21 Act is a high focus on rare disease drugs, so which is great to hear. So here's the big one, and this is why we're actually presenting this. Biopharma traditionally, why certainly using technology to do lab analysis, et cetera. As part of this, we will see a much closer handshake between the life sciences and what people are calling digital health. Things are, is future compounds or the future zeros and ones and the bytes. Obviously, this will certainly increase the privacy challenges because part of the Century 21 Cures Act is also touching on the fact that consumers that are part of these programs normally consent to one study. Part of this is, well, can you continue using this data across the researchers or researching institutions? So that's one piece, but around that IT, and I'm just going to show you guys, and this is why we're taking the ecosystem approach. There's appointed members to the board of this once this gets approved, and this is the breakdown. So it sounds like only 2 out of the 17 are from the health IT industry, but if you look at the representation, we obviously have the biopharmaceutical, life sciences. We also have a significant patient representation, which is great to see. And then research. I mean, research is still a very, very, very important piece, and many universities around the world, not just in the U.S., are doing absolutely fantastic things, including swallowing nanopills and tracking and tracing, things throughout your body. It's really truly fascinating to see what's going on out there. One last thing here, actually, if you notice in the last two, the providers and the plans, and again, this just goes to show a regulatory perspective and how we at SoftServe is looking at the whole care ecosystem from wellness to the chronic disease management and all the major players that are involved in it. So this, just 2 slides ago. We obviously have HIPAA in place today, and the jury is still out. Obviously, this bill passed the House and off to the Congress. Our projection is we'll see quite a lot of changes still, come out of Congress. And one of the key things, which is a whole chapter in that 300-plus document in Part 6, is actually dedicated to sensible of technology. And so from, as technologists, depending who's listening on this, to some of your questions, we really need to this. Regulations need to be dissected in detail, and obviously as they change coming out of Congress, we'll see what that brings. Obviously, the de-identification process that's been in place today, or anonymization in some cases, sharing that information through research, but also what I mentioned earlier, beyond one study, which is my data, can be pretty much anywhere within any research institution. So we have a social responsibility to obviously help the patient to get these drugs out into the marketplace. But again, if you're in a CIO role, you need to be thinking even more stringently about your security, but at the same time, not to break an innovation cycle in corporations, right? So that's where, we have tremendous experience to serve, and be happy to answer any questions as well. Well, there would be no such thing as, no big data conversation. Certainly still a buzzword, but the systems that are being in place, and actually I did a presentation recently at a HealthTO event over on artificial intelligence in healthcare and how it's impacting it. And a huge component across personalized medicine and artificial intelligence, which is at the end of the day is all about either changing or help patients change their behavior and understand everything from drug interactions to their genetics. So just think about for a second, in the last 2 years, brought down the cost of whole genome sequencing to less than $1,000. And I actually just read somewhere a company is doing this for about $3. So the whole sequence, which is that WSG, is about 52 gigabytes. For a point in time So we don't know what we don't know, right? I mean, companies 23andMe and many others are some certain biomarkers, but as the process of the sequencing gets mature, there's a lot more data to analyze. And so out of the predictive analytics and our own data science team is a very important team at SoftServe, and should be in every corporation these days. So lucky data scientists, they've got a lot of data to go through. But to the next point here, the sequence alignment data, which actually allows you to kind of resequence not in the full time frame that it normally takes, 150 terabytes. And so if you think again about the implications of not just storage, but securing, manipulating data, processing data, and again, in order to personalize medicine a reality for a number of drugs, and warfarin is an example that's been already done for many years. But the big data play here, and again, just put on your hat, you really need to be thinking through what those scaling architectures that will allow, especially if you're in a life sciences company, how to scale to process this over and over and over. So with I want to end the conversation or the presentation in the one way. There's obviously, many things that we can go deeper and discuss, and I'd be happy to hear from you. Twitter at Health Eugene. You can shoot your email to webinar@softserveinc.com. And certainly through Twitter, I'm a big fan of that. You can reach out to me anytime if there's any deep dive that you would love to cover, any of these slides or how we can help.
Thanks.
Olga?
Thanks, Eugene, for your great speech. I'm just checking our email, webinar@softserveinc.com. So, yeah, here are a couple of questions already. Here's the first one for you. So, in the IT organization, supporting these efforts, what should we focus on in the next 6 to 12 months? Please boil it down for me.
Great. Yeah, I know that when you're looking to a lot of slides and you just want a key message, and I think I try to accentuate that throughout each slide. But obviously, depending on where in the IT organization or which subsector you're in. So obviously, in the life sciences sector, really focusing on a lot of things around data processing. And I think it's really across the board, because if you're in a hospital system, usually there are genetics labs, and there are partnerships with institutions. So certainly I would say on the top of your list is big data processing. And of course there's a lot of off-the-shelf platforms, but I would also urge to look at the Lambda architectures that actually SoftServe can help with. How do you really scale this to the knowledge? The other piece is, I touched on it briefly in one of the first slides, is the whole patient engagement. And again, it's another buzzword, but from the perspective of mobile technology and also leveraging some of the sensors, and you within the life sciences or the healthcare or the provider side, you obviously don't need to develop the sensors. There's many players out there, but aggregating that data together is another key component. So boiling down, big data, mobile, and of course, depending on where you stand from a privacy perspective, also cloud architectures to help you offload some of those costs.
Great, thanks, Eugene. So the next question, what is the likelihood of this regulation to move forward?
So I purposely said this in the beginning. We're obviously not a regulatory compliance tracking company. We're doing this to help our clients to kind of around thought leadership. If I personally had the crystal ball, the fact that this passed, across the Democrats and the Republicans with, flying colors through the House, I really don't expect this being held up in Congress. Now, having said that, and what I mentioned earlier, I think the version of the bill that we see today will be it's between somewhat to very different, especially when it comes to increased regulations around privacy and security. So again, if I had to personally put percentages on this, this has very, very high percentages of moving forward.
And I think the last question for today, because we're running out of time and we don't want to keep our public listening forever to the questions and answers. Thanks. This was super informative, but how can SoftServe help us prepare for this?
All right, so I'll try to boil this down again, and I try to voice some of these things over the slides. Again, SoftServe is a global software consulting company. We have everything from design practice to BI and analytics and everything in between. If you think about the patient engagement tools, our design center of excellence can help there, understanding how humans and patients behave. On the big data and analytics side, as well as our growing data science team, we can help you put together architectures, structure, not just a strategy, but even a tactical approach to how you get this stuff done. How do you onboard this data? How do you integrate this data into your EMR systems, as an example? How do you make it actionable using our data science team? One thing I do want to say, we're not a clinical company. The healthcare practice is a big portion of our business, but when it comes to the clinical rules themselves, we will work with your teams to structure them and to put them in place. And we focus with the context and our understanding of the ecosystem on how we can help you actually build the platforms that will help you scale.
Thanks for joining the webinar today. Hopefully it was time well spent and a great experience for you. Please do not hesitate to tweet me at HealthEugene and keep an eye out for our next webinar.